Well, this is a different wardrobe for us this week on
But a
Lessons from
killer
last
wardrobe.
time. We came in dressed, if I may, kind of boring. And Ginger saw that, and she had brought us these amazing outfits.
New threads.
That is
Ah.
pockets.
Yeah, and oh my gosh, this thing's epic. I will wear this. This actually, you'll see this in a rap video that we're gonna do where I take on 𝗕𝗲𝗍𝗶 in a rap battle. So
Perfect.
you just do this. Like you show up every time. So first of all, welcome Ginger.
Thank you.
And thanks for showing up. This is just who you are. And I'm super excited that we're going to get into some of your backstory a little bit and the things that you've overcome through your life. But you always just show up with stuff. So start there. Why you just think about people?
Yeah. Well, it makes it fun, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's a matter of make it fun, make it memorable, make it something that people will enjoy.
Yeah.
And that's what life should be about.
I totally agree.
Mission accomplished. I mean,
Yeah.
it was so cool to chat with you yesterday via Zoom. It was the first time I've ever had a chance to talk with you in our little pre-interview. But to have you show up with all of this form of swag is just so cool.
Yeah. And for those listening and not watching it, you're missing out right now. I've
Totally.
got
Yeah.
a really amazing
Yeah,
fur
find the
coat
video.
and you have, this is amazing.
It's
I
pers-
feel a
it's
little
per-
bit like Ralph Macchio in Karate
I was
Kid, something
thinking
like
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a little
I'm going to do
bit.
some wax on, wax off later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Miyagi.
Okay, it's getting Miyagi.
Miyagi.
It's getting very warm, so I'm gonna actually.
So
might
you have your jacket
I'm gonna
on
switch
underneath
off.
it. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even take my jacket off before I put this jacket on
Since
because I
heat
think it
comes
was
out your
needed.
head, I'm going to take the hat off in hopes that I can keep the jacket on
Okay.
for the remainder.
Man, this is awesome. Okay, how am I doing? Do I have some white feathers? All right. So this will always be the episode where I was wearing white feathers.
we might need hair and makeup in here.
I know. I'm just going all the way here.
You got attacked by
So-
an ostrich.
Have you seen the
That
shirt
works.
yet? I just got the shirt
I like
literally
that shirt.
today from
I like
the
that
show Silicon Valley. Okay, Ginger, there is so much we could talk about because you have a vast array of history. But let's
Doesn't
just
sound good,
start
does it?
early. Sorry, I didn't just call you old. Let's start early on. Our connection, and we didn't even know this, but Ginger and I worked at the same place
Yeah.
at like 10 years apart at Marlowe's in Denver. I was a waiter there. You were a waiter there too, right? Or waitress
Yeah.
there? And so we didn't know this. And then when we met, we started talking about, oh, well, you lived in Denver. I lived in Denver.
I remember you telling
I
me
worked
that
at Marlowe's.
story.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh,
it's
I worked at
crazy.
Marlowe's. So we have some history, but I don't know anything about you before we met in the mortgage industry. Like everything I know about you is since you've been in mortgage. So walk us through just briefly where'd you come from?
Colorado.
Mhm.
So I came from
You
Colorado.
were born and raised in Colorado?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Colorado. Grew up in Westminster, so
Okay.
outside, and worked at Marlowe's. Yes,
Mhm.
I was so excited about getting that job there because it was probably one of the nicest restaurants in Denver,
Yeah.
and it was a part-time job for me, and so it was a lot of fun there. But yeah, I grew up in Colorado. Come from a family of 4 children adopted. And my parents were foster parents and fostered over 150 foster babies.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, yeah, we grew up there. And then I moved to Oregon in 87. So I've been in Oregon ever since.
So,
Well,
go
I'm
ahead.
just curious, what precipitated that move?
I got a job.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
I want to dive in a little bit just because I got to fly next to somebody who works in the foster care system as an ambassador. He goes around and speaks on foster care and works to make it better. But he was a foster child as a young person, and he talked about, and I'll never forget this. He said, "I never had furniture."
Yeah.
And his big experience was he's like, I had a plastic bag and like a nightstand would have been amazing. But
Yeah.
I knew right then that like there's a lot to this,
Yeah.
right? To people that have chosen to take care of people. So
Yeah.
did you have people in and out of the house all the time?
So my parents, little backstory. So my parents had 2 of their own biological children, and they were not healthy. They both had congenital heart defects.
Mm.
And so the oldest, Brian, died when he was 1, so I never knew him. And then Gary, he died at 9. I was 7. And so after the second, then my parents were told, hey, you don't make good babies. And they weren't done having babies. So they started adopting. So I was the first. And then they went through Lutheran Family Services in Denver. And then I have a younger brother who's 4 years younger than me. It was his second, Steve. And then they kind of got into this system that there were a lot of babies that were being placed for adoption, but there was an interim time when the mother would give up the baby that there was no place for the baby to go. And so there were foster parents who would take care of the babies during that interim before they were placed for adoption. So that's what my parents did. So we always had babies in the house.
Wow.
Wow.
Occasionally, we would end up with a child that had been taken away by the state, in which case, my brother Kevin, we actually fostered him. He was taken from his mother. I think the first time he was maybe a couple months old, maybe 3 or 4 months old, we had him. And then he went back to his mother and then ended up being taken away again, at which time my parents said, well, we'll adopt him.
Wow.
So we had fostered him, and then we adopted him. And then they adopted one more, my sister Kim. So 4 adopted, and then 150 babies. So I always say I never had to have dolls because we always had the real thing.
That's an
Wow.
incredible story.
Yeah.
What impression did that make on you as a young person that you're living in this environment that is constantly changing, but constantly changing with this expression of love and compassion and care? And how did that imprint on you?
Well, it's interesting because, I think you have to learn to bond quickly,
Mm-hmm.
to care deeply, and know that caring is not going to be long lasting because you're going to have to let go.
Mm.
So, probably one of the biggest lessons I learned is change,
Mm.
which is funny you think about that. And, it's a big part of my life and who I am is not being afraid of change. And then probably a little bit of a guarded, you want to love, but you also know that love is not going to be lasting
Temporary.
because you are going to say goodbye. And my mother, when she passed and we went through her garage, she had just probably like 20 different scrapbooks of photos. She took photos and she had cards from the families that wrote to her through the years. Through the adoption agency, they would be able to send her cards and pictures as the kids grew up. And she had saved a lot of those. In fact, it's funny because as kids kind of joked, it's like, I think she had more pictures of her foster babies than she maybe did of her own. But yeah, I mean, I think that's probably one of the biggest lessons is that, to be there and not knowing what that looks like because every child was different.
Mhm.
Some were special needs.
Sure.
Some were perfect, and so each one was a little bit different. So always the unexpected.
Wow.
It's interesting because it goes to the caregiver mentality. Your parents, your example was caregiving.
Yeah.
And here you are, going back to this silly thing, but when you came in here, you're like, what might they really enjoy? What might make them smile and laugh? You're still a caregiver coming from
Yeah.
that background of this is how you treat people.
Yeah. Never thought of it that way, but I guess so. Yeah.
I was just thinking, we had somebody in studio yesterday talking about the state of the industry right now and what's going on in the industry and how we have to be adaptable to change. We have to be able to flex when the market flexes and all that stuff. And I'm sitting here listening to your story going, that is so easy compared to what life dishes out sometimes and what we
Yeah.
have to go. And your story of having to adapt to a dynamic environment. I guess we make the simple complex sometimes by saying that we can't adjust to a higher interest rate market when people have to adapt as humans to much more difficult, much more challenging, much more life altering realities like what you grew up with.
Yeah. But it was fun too. I mean, it
Sure,
was like,
sure.
yeah, it's like all those things that come along. And I learned a lot. You learn a lot about taking on responsibility and to be able to, help out and pitch in. And, sometimes you complain a little bit and it's like, buck up, you know what? This is just how it is. But it's definitely I learned a team environment and in a family atmosphere because that's what we were. Everybody pitched in. You'd wake up in the middle of the night and change diapers or give a bottle or, whatever.
Whatever you had to do.
Yeah.
I didn't like doing that as an adult. I can't imagine
I
doing
only
that
did
as
it
a
once
kid.
as an adult.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask because you have one child. And
We
so
do.
was that like, okay, I grew up with a lot of children and now we're just going to have the one?
Yeah, I mean, and my son Blaine. We worked a long time to have Blaine and didn't think he was going to happen. He was our miracle boy, 2 pounds, 7 ounces when he was born.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
and he was born code blue, resuscitated 3 times. I was put on meg drip. My body was in failure, my kidney and liver. And so the doctor said, not again. And so we
Wow.
thought about adoption. And, at the time, we honestly owned 2 Subway franchises and our son was little. And it's kind of like, you know what? We are going to do our very best with one and be open to what happens, what God brings us down the path. And he brought that because our son had a lot of friends that needed a place to stay, wasn't a good home life, I mean, whatever. And so we were able to do that. So we extended in an informal way to be
Hmm.
able to provide that fostering, if you will.
There's that caregiver thing again.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen the pictures and I've talked to you about these stories of you're kind of the mom of
Yes.
of
They call me Mama B.
yeah.
Yeah.
So again, it doesn't matter what environment you're in, you're looking to be a caregiver and take care of people.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. You talked about yesterday on our call. You talked about your interest in and your affection for this idea of generational leadership, and I'm starting to understand where some of that might come from because you experienced generational leadership
Yeah.
as a child growing up.
Yeah.
Tell me more about how that evolved in the course of your life. I know you're doing some work with Bill Dallas and possibly his son in generational leadership, or you said that
His
was,
daughter. Yeah.
sorry, daughter. Okay.
Yeah. 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 Many industries have the potential to take what they've built as a generation and pass it on to the next. And we're starting to see that in the mortgage industry. Bill Dallas and his daughter, Patty Jo, are one. Patty Jo works at Total Expert. And, Bill is still involved in the industry, but um, one of the greatest leaders. I know he's been a guest.
Hmm.
And I worked for him for some time as well in my consulting business and learned a lot of lessons. So I was talking to his daughter, and she had mentioned that as far as wanting to start a podcast between the two of them and to share the lessons they've learned. And we're seeing that, and it's a hard time now in our industry, but I also know a lot of individuals involved in the industry have worked hard to build that business. And so how do you pass that on?
Hmm.
And so we are starting to see that next generation. So, I think that's part of the challenge is as uh, as we are parents, and what lessons can you pass on that they'll take, and then what lessons are you going to learn from them as well? And so I think that's part of it is that back and forth to be able to have that and what that looks like because it's not one-sided. And
No.
and I think that's as an industry, I think there's huge potential to be able to help our industry navigate through this because we definitely are at that point. It used to be the average age, and you probably know, Ken, of the LO was 50 something. I think
Hmm.
it has gone down now
It's starting to.
because of that.
Right.
Hmm.
And so, how do you take those lessons, pass those on, and let them make it their own? And, it's funny. It made me think of a time I had the opportunity to co-author a book with Jack Canfield, and we were at an event in LA. I think we were promoting the book or something, and we were at the Hollywood Roosevelt, one of my favorite hotels in LA. And we're sitting out by the pool after the event and talking to Jack and a couple other people. And I had brought my son along. And I think that's a lot of it is bring your kids along.
Mhm.
When my son was in between colleges, I made him do the circuit with me at events, and I put him onto panels. and had him go and, watch as you're networking and talking to people. And he did an internship with Plaza. I mean, I put him, immersed him in the industry. He would sat down and met with 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗏, and Renee mentored him some. And so, it's like creating those lessons, immersing your kids in with others are things that you can do to be able to have them learn. But I did that with him, and it helped him a lot. So I think those are some of the lessons that they can bring
Well, I
in.
harken back to your upbringing. It happened to you. You had generational leadership, and everyone that lived in your house did, because you had to pitch in, you had
Yeah.
to help out, you had parents modeling what was required to
Right.
be contributors to this family and
Yeah.
to be meaningful parts of the family, and it just stuck with you.
It was funny. I was on a webinar with 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏,
Yes.
and
There's another
it's a
example.
great example of, he starts off, he's like, "Hey guys, I'm 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗏 Chrisman. You probably know me as, Rob Chrisman's son." And I'm like, I can't wait for him to not have to say that. But like, there's a shadow that's cast,
Yeah.
especially by people in the industry that are, I mean, Bill Dallas is a great example. Some people have just set themselves with their brand in the industry, and coming in as the child has its advantages, but also can be hard, because people might look at you and be like, well, you're this person's kid. You still have to prove yourself.
Right.
It's like being an in-house lender at a real estate company. People think, oh, you just get all the leads. No, it's actually almost harder to do that
Yeah.
than it is, because you really come in having to show what you're worth,
Right.
outside of just, well, they're obviously in this position for that
Yeah.
reason. So
And you typically have pretty big shoes to fill.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's so funny too, at seminars, people walk up and they've been going to our seminars for a long time, and now they're like, oh, I want you to meet my child. Like, it's the sons and daughters at the seminars now that are getting into the mortgage business. And it's fun to watch, because it was stale for a while.
It
Like,
was.
everybody was here forever, and
Yep.
nobody was bringing anybody along with them. And there's a gap. I feel like I was kind of the youngest person in the mortgage industry for a while, and
Yeah.
beneath me, nobody was getting in. And then all of a sudden, now we're starting to see it.
I think the average age was 54 for quite a while, which
Yeah.
actually seems kind of young to me.
That's so young.
It seems quite young.
Yeah. So let's go to, how did you enter? Because you had Subway franchises.
Yes.
Do you still have those?
No, gosh.
Okay.
That's a long time ago.
But how'd you go from there to mortgage?
So Subway, we figured out the best way to get pregnant when you can't get pregnant is to buy a Subway franchise.
Oh, wow. Write that down, everybody.
So yeah, we it wasn't working, and it's like, okay, well, we'll start a business. So we bought the franchise and then ended up pregnant. So we had 2 Subways, sold those, and then I went into training and did training. It's for telecom companies, and then I worked for Dale Carnegie Training. So I was a corporate trainer with Dale Carnegie Training. Did a lot of training with engineers. Was there for several years, and then a friend of mine in the mortgage industry, Tom Tuff, who recently passed, he called and he said, "Hey, we need some, training developed and proficiencies done, and you want to come in and help us?" And so I said, sure. So Tom was my introduction into the mortgage industry. And then I got in, and we used to have the binders, of all of the different, programs and everything. And it's like, man, you guys need a lot of training developed. And so just fell in love with the industry. And of course, Capcom went out of business. And then I worked at Argent as an account executive, which is where you and I met. And you had just started
Yeah.
Broker Knowledge.
Yeah. Broker Knowledge Group was March of 2003 officially.
Yeah.
And you were my first wholesale client, because I coached you guys, and I have never coached since then, but
we were that bad.
no, you guys were amazing. It was so cool, because you had, everywhere you go, you kind of create families.
Yeah.
And so you had created this little family where you were super tight with the people that you worked with. You, even though I was kind of coaching, you were really taking a lot of the lead on, going out there and, okay, guys, this is what we're going to do. And like, you manage the huddles, and you were kind of it felt like you were the big sister for the people that were on your team.
Trey and Robin. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I do want to go into, because I think there's some huge lessons, from what happened with the whole NMLS thing. So you and Trey and Robin and Chris were all
Robin
working
wasn't in
together.
it.
But you guys were all working together, and then you built a technology.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Because it's amazing how much you put in, and I remember your excitement during that time.
Yeah. Yeah. So back in the day, and I think you'd broker knowledge. You were doing some CE back then
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
In fact, I think I was the only person that had ever taught a CE class. So Ken had double booked himself.
No.
He literally just taught in Austin because I was gone. So
He
yeah.
double booked himself, and he had never had anyone else teach. And he called me, he goes, I double booked myself. And it was a RESPA class. I was terrified,
Oh my
absolutely
gosh. It was Pac
terrified.
Res.
It was Pac Res.
Yeah.
Eric, Matt, Melissa, yep.
Mm.
And you were in Bend. So
Uh-huh.
you went to the one in Bend. I did the one. I think it was maybe an hour, 2 hours. So it's like we made it through. Nobody died. But what I did is I started taking from the wholesale side and doing CE, like 1 hour CEs on FHA and
Mhm.
USDA. And so, yeah, so we were doing CE. And from that, as you know, each state had different requirements before the passage of the SAFE Act. And every so often, I would start getting phone calls from people saying, hey, do you have a copy of my certificate of completion? Because it's time for renewal. And everybody had a different renewal date. It was never the same. And it's like, don't you keep a copy of that? Because I sent it to you. Yeah, well, yeah. And it's like, okay. And I think I honestly had like 10 emails or phone calls in one day. And it's like, oh my gosh, you guys, this is crazy. Can't you keep track of this?
We started charging for reprints.
Which makes
We're like,
sense.
screw you guys. Like it was the same people every single year. And I get it because I'm one of those people. But it
Yeah.
was like, dude, really? Like we're gonna have to because it takes our time to go back and do these,
Yeah. So I said, there's a problem. There's probably a need. And so we developed a platform that tracked the continuing education. And then from that, Trey I worked with, and so Trey and I had partnered up. Chris did a little bit of work for us, kind of on a sales side a little bit.
Mhm.
And so we created a very simple solution. I had hired a programmer. They did it on Ruby on Rails.
Wow.
And then it started taking off. You were, I mean, one of the things that Yvonne, it was
Mhm.
Neil, she was on, we had a board in Oregon that would kind of give an approval
Mhm.
or whatever for CE. And so we had a calendar on it. And that was really one of the big things is people couldn't find where the CE classes were. And so as part of the calendar, then Ken would have to post your classes
Mhm.
onto the calendar. And so from there, we started taking off. And then we hired John to do more coding. And so we honestly we had the hours for every single state in the United States for CE. California was the most complex. And
It still is.
and still is.
Mhm.
But every single state, we had programmed in all the continuing education requirements for every single state on the mortgage side. And we had a contract with Fidelity National Title. We had just penned a contract with the California Department of Real Estate to track all California DRE licensees. And Commissioner Jeff Dovey had a meeting with their whole executive team, including the commissioner. And I remember he walked out the door and he goes, okay, Ginger, I'm giving you 1.5 million licensees. I expect a good price. And it's like, not a problem. And probably like a month later, the SAFE Act
Wow.
came along. And it took a little bit to pass. And then when it passed, it's like, okay, I called Trey, who was my business partner, and I said, we're out of business. Plus, it was the mortgage meltdown anyway in 2008. So everything was happening. And I said, we're going to have to go and get jobs. And he's like, I'm not doing anything else. I'm, going down with the ship, which he did. They foreclosed on his house. I took a job with Plaza and started doing training, every single mortgage regulation that was out there. And I am not like Ken. Ken lives and dies by this,
He
but
loves it.
he loves it. I don't, but it was the only thing that was out there at the time. And so we did take our system to the NMLS and submit it for consideration for the NMLS. And I got a call from Pete who was the president at the time. And he said, yours is the best solution, but we can't go with you
Oh my gosh.
because you're a startup. And there was no angel funds. I mean, there was nothing at the time. So yeah, we were definitely between a rock and a hard place. Ken was one of the very first who came on board, and I think we're at the beginning stages of it
Mm-hmm.
when everything just started happening. So,
Mm-hmm.
and honestly, a lot of it is a blur back then, and probably for you too, because it was just crazy.
I just remember the excitement of you built something that was about to be a nationwide. You would have been the NMLS.
Mm-hmm.
I also remember the company that they went with, and everybody hated the NMLS because, and I just kept going because you made a bad choice. Like the system that they went with was such a nightmare.
What I love in what you're saying, though, you shared a phrase that either you coined or someone coined at a Florida conference you were recently at: shift hard, shift fast.
Oh,
This isn't new for you.
no.
Adaptation. So in the context of lessons from last time and the things that can be gleaned out of your life experience as a professional and as just a human going through what you've gone through, shift hard to shift fast seems like pretty good insight for
Mhm.
anybody that is in the mortgage space that's dealing with the last 18 months of, oh crap. Uh,
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about that phrase and kind of its origin and what it means to you. And obviously it's been lived out by you.
Yeah. Well, I think it's definitely a lessons from last time that I learned, that it's, and especially with this, there was a regulation, took us out.
Mhm.
I mean, there was absolutely nothing. I was just sharing this story with my son and a friend of his, and we were just talking about something they were going through, and they were afraid to make a change. I said, you know what? Don't ever be afraid to make a change. It may not be the right change, but make a change. And, you have to decide what that is. For us, we obviously followed the NMLS. It's like, okay, went to a conference. I don't know if you were at that. Were you at that first conference?
Mhm.
I know. Um, and I went to the conference, and I went to this conference, and I say this at every conference: let me be open to the people that I am to meet, and let them be open to meeting me, because
Hmm.
you never know who you're to
Mhm.
meet. And and so I sat next to Pete. I can't think of his last name right now, but you know who I'm talking
Yeah.
about. What is his last
I'm
name?
trying to remember too. Pete, not Pete Mills.
Probably
Pete.
not Davidson.
No, it's not. He was never in this business.
No, not Davidson.
Oh, dang it.
But anyway, I
Yeah.
sat next to him, and from that, then was able to, and then Bill, who's since passed, um, but was very involved with the NMLS. And we had, because of Idaho too, Gavin
Mm-hmm.
was the commissioner,
Mm-hmm.
and he was on the board of the
Right.
NMLS. And so, you just kind of take those things and say, okay, I've got to change. And I don't have a choice. I mean, I had no choice. There was no business. We didn't get the national listing. And honestly, I sat down with Tom, my friend, and we were having lunch, and I said, I have to change. This is not going to work. And he says, what are you going to do? And I said, I think I'm going to go back to Dale Carnegie and go back to, what I did before in training. And that's when Tom said, we've got all these regulations coming out. My brokers need training for that. So why don't you just come and do that for me?
Mm.
And so I did that for Tom. And then from there, Plaza on the national side started picking up on it with the webinars we were
Mm-hmm.
doing. And so then I started working for Plaza, and from Plaza, created an entire training platform for them, and just started creating training on different programs.
So that little entree into training previously turned into,
Another entree
hey,
into,
this might be
yeah,
actually a business model for
yeah,
now.
yeah.
And by the way, it is Pete Mills. It's my brain just came
Oh,
back to
it is
me.
Pete Mills.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I want to dissect that a little bit, because what you just addressed is something happened to you that was totally out of your control.
Yep.
It happened to something that you had built and spent hours and lots of money
Lots of
and
money.
lots of time. And
Mhm.
you, in your head, had already figured out, like, this is the way this is going to work. This is the way everything's going to end. You knew it was an uphill battle. You weren't afraid of the uphill battle, and you did everything you could do.
Mhm.
Something totally unrelated, or related, but totally out of your control
Yeah.
happens. It wasn't that you weren't good enough. It was that the startup piece. So this is similar to what a lot of mortgage people have gone through recently, of they did everything right. The
Mhm.
rate shift, the rates basically double. And there's a difference in people who've been able to do what you just said and people who weren't able to do what you just said and are still waiting for something to come and save them,
Yeah.
right? So your ability to turn and be like, all right, what's next?
Mm.
You knew when to do it. Did you do it? I mean, it was a moment in time, right? Did it take you very long to bounce, or were you just like, yeah,
No,
okay,
let's
next
just
thing?
do it.
Yeah, you kind of do that,
You have to do that.
right?
Yeah,
Well, but you do. Like, yes, everybody has to, but for you, it's built in you to go shift.
yeah. I remember having a conversation. It was actually with my husband, and he doesn't like change, hates it, will drag his feet as far as making change. And I told him one time, I said, you know what? If we were in a battlefield and we were in a foxhole and we were being fired upon, you would have to leave. And if you continue in this fear mode, I would leave without you because I have a very strong survival mode.
Mhm.
And so I was like, I'm going to bring you along, but if you're not going to come, I'm going anyway. And I think that's kind of the mentality you have to have with yourself and be okay with that. Say, you know what? Okay, so you don't want to do that. That's your decision. And very much when Trey, we were business owners, and I said, you need to go find a job. This is not going to work. We're going to be maybe, 2 years down the road, it'll come back. Maybe something else will happen, but this is not working. You need to get out of the foxhole. We are being fired upon, and there is nothing to do but leave.
Or be crippled by fear.
And if you're crippled by fear,
You die.
you die.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean,
So
it's
get out of the foxhole.
get out of the foxhole.
Mhm.
Shift hard, shift fast.
And if you find someone that is crippled, then help them out.
Absolutely.
But
Mhm.
also know if they're not willing to move, you have to take care of yourself. And I think that's probably where a lot of people are, where they're like, but I've got this team, or I've got this, or,
Mhm.
it's like, but I've been doing this for so long.
Or to Ken's point, the Fed's going to come through and start quantitative easing again.
Yeah, and
They're
we're
going to
gonna
buy
be
all these
fine,
bonds and
and
rates are going to get
right.
better. We'll have a refi boom again.
And then I'll
And
work.
this is the market you have right now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Figure it out.
Yeah.
Rates are 8 or whatever they are right now, 7.5%. They might go down. They also might go up. We've seen
Mhm.
18 before, right?
Bought our
Adapt.
first house at that.
Yeah.
Adapt.
But it's like sitting in the foxhole going,
It's
I bet
exactly
they'll
right.
stop shooting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
they're
bet
going to
they'll
run out of
It's gonna
bullets
stop.
soon.
Yeah.
They're going to
It'll
run
be
out of
dark
bullets
soon,
soon.
and they'll stop.
Yeah.
They probably don't have a mortar.
Yeah.
Right. So you just bounce. You just bounce quickly and you invest.
That's the shift hard, shift fast.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
If you are watching this podcast and you're in the mortgage industry and you haven't checked out the Knowledge Coop, you definitely need to dive into the Knowledge Coop. In there, you will find content and community that will help you grow as an individual by learning everything there is to know about the mortgage industry. If you think you know everything, just dive in and take some classes because there's always something more you can learn. To be successful in this business, you've got to continually learn. In addition, if you're a company and you want to teach your people in your own environment, we've got that in the Knowledge Coop Enterprise Services. So reach out to us, check out knowledgecoop.com. Definitely join Coop Plus. Let's get back to the podcast.
I love what you said about your son and the business ventures that he's gotten into, and he's in esports. And he's got an esports team, and the name he chose and the why behind that and the story behind that was just powerful and
Yeah.
beautiful to me. Would you share that a little
Yeah,
bit?
it's actually this shirt. I
Oh,
wore
there you
today.
go.
Yeah.
Sanguine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So my son has had this deep interest in gaming, as many young, and it's not just a male dominated sport. It's
Not
actually
anymore.
very high for females. He shared
Mhm.
some numbers, which I could make up, but it's like approaching 50%
Wow.
for a female. So he's just, and he always told me, he goes, Mom, the job I'm going to have doesn't exist. And, he said this through college. He got a scholarship to go to school in Ohio and help them start a college league for esports. And then they gave him another scholarship to get his master's. So yes, so he's working in esports right now, but he had the opportunity to have a franchise for a professional esports team in a game that's called Smite. And so it was a big thing. Like Dan Kennedy with Rocket has gotten into this. He has 100 Thieves.
Wow.
The Pittsburgh Steelers actually owned one of the franchises in the same league that my son was in.
You
And
said he
so
has 100 thieves?
it's called 100 Thieves.
Okay.
Camera.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, that was Dan's.
Okay. When he
Uh,
said he's gotten into this, he has 100 thieves. I'm like,
No,
so he's hired people to steal from
no.
people? Okay.
The
I
team
used
is
to be a
called
gamer. I used to be
the
a
team is
gamer.
called 100 Thieves. It's probably
Okay.
the most popular, most well-known
Wow. Okay.
franchise. So anyway, so he got this franchise and he had to come up with a name. And so he chose the name Sanguine, which means optimistic in the face of adversity.
Which is a
And
definition I never had real clarity on. I think I assumed sanguine to be optimistic, but with a concerned perspective about like it was almost a
Happy, light, fun-loving.
yeah, but I love that literal definition. It's so profoundly
Yeah.
powerful.
well, and very meaningful for his team because the team he brought in, he signed a team that was all from Latin America.
Mm.
And the team played all virtually. So they had never all played together in person. And so when he had this franchise, he had a lot of teams that came to him, oh, pick me, you know, because they got moved to Atlanta. They got an annual salary. They got housing. I mean, this was the dream to be able to be a professional esports player. And so he had a lot of people that were contacting him saying, hey, we want to play on your team. And he selected this group of players all from Latin America. So they're from Guatemala
Oh my
and
gosh.
from Uruguay and Peru and Chile. And so he brought them in. They had P1 visas, which is the highest visa you can get as far as a sports
Wow.
visa. And so he brought them in. They landed March 7th of 2020. And then everything happened. And so truly the whole thing behind that, you know, sanguine, optimistic in the face of adversity. Because here's a group of kids, and we actually did a documentary about them because they played in countries that there was not good ping on what they were getting on internet. Their speeds were very slow. And one of them, they would piece together and make their own PCs. And one of them couldn't afford to have regular, you know, console to play on it. And so he hooked his computer up to a TV and sat on his bed and played for hours competitively.
Wow.
And so their goal was to go on and to win the World Cup. And so I would fly out to Atlanta. We had a house for them and got them a team sponsor and for the house. And so I put up all of these, you know, we would put in Spanish signs up all around, you know, number one goal, win worlds. There is no other goal. And we had all these things up. And they did. They went on and they won worlds. And it's funny because last year, my son and I went, they lived there in the house for 3 years that we rented. Imagine that call. It's like I'm calling landlord saying, okay, we would like to rent your house for a year. And by the way, we're bringing in 6 professional esports players from Latin America.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that was a tough one. We did finally find someone and they stayed there for a long time. But what was so cool when they did win and we were going to move them out of the house finally, all of the signs they'd all left up in the house.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And I looked at that and I had the year on there, and their goal was to win in 2021, which was the year that they won Worlds. And it's like, talk about putting, I mean, that's that visual, that's the thing. So, whatever that goal is, put it up there, put it out there, share it with people, involve other people, focus on it, no matter what.
I hope our viewers or listeners are connecting the dots here because I'm still going all the way back to your experience as a child
Yeah.
and the generational leadership that you benefited from. And I'm sure your parents made mistakes too, but we all have,
Oh,
right?
we all do.
But then I'm looking at your son and just the decision to land on the name Sanguine and all that it implies and all that it means. He can owe some measure of that back to your parents
Yeah.
and the way they raised you and then what you imparted in him, this idea that I'm going to be optimistic in the face of
Yeah.
adversity. That's just going to define my life. And yes, there'll be times where I get my teeth kicked in and there will be times where I win big. But if there's one thing I hope people grab hold of in this episode, it's that notion that generational leadership doesn't have to be necessarily genetic, right?
No.
Look at the kids from the
Mhm.
Latin American
Yeah.
countries that, I mean, look at the benefit that extended across race, culture, generation,
Yeah.
genetics.
Yeah.
Powerful.
Yeah. And helping each other. I think that's the thing too, is we don't always know where we're going to get that help and support from. So being open to that is
Mm.
important, and being open to helping others too, no matter what.
Tell me your phrase one more time your mantra sort of before you go to an event like a conference or something like
So
that.
let me be open to the people I am to meet, and let them be open to meeting me.
I suggest that that's probably more than just a mantra for a trade show or a conference. That seems to be your mantra in how you
Mhm.
approach life.
I think, we we have an innate ability to be open to things, events, people. But sometimes we close ourselves and think we have our own idea about what's supposed to happen. And so I think it's important to be open
Mm.
to whatever that is. We are a conduit to events that are happening, to things that are happening. And sometimes one little thing that you do, and you don't even know you're doing it, can have a profound effect on somebody else. And so I think just having that openness is important to be able to do that. And then listening, it's like to what is important to other people, and being able to support that. I think that's, and probably it's one of the things, you talk about caring. That's important to me.
Mhm.
Sue Woodard, and she and I are good friends. She always says, she goes, Ginger, that's your superpower. And it does come, I'm sure, from my parents, because they obviously were big givers in a way that they weren't getting a lot back. And they did get a lot back from
But
that,
not recognition,
but
not,
not the
Mhm.
yeah,
recognition,
yeah.
not the pay,
Mhm.
definitely, but that. And so I think just being open to that, but also knowing, and again, it goes back to, it's like you have to be willing to shift hard and shift fast,
Mhm.
because sometimes we think, yeah, especially with the rates, it's like, oh, it's going to change. It's like, even if it does change, that's okay. That will happen down the road. So what are you going to do about it right now?
Today.
Mhm.
And what I see a lot in the industry is people are just waiting, and it's like, you know what? You have oranges, go sell oranges. You may have apples tomorrow. You may have lemons the next day. You don't know what that next crop is going to be, but today you have oranges.
And you may know more about apples and lemons, but today you have oranges. So figure it
Mhm.
out.
So,
Learn as much as you can about oranges and go
mhm.
sell them.
And let people know you have oranges. That's
Mhm.
probably one of the biggest things I see too, is people are not people are afraid to get out there and do marketing and to promote and to educate and to do all that. It's like, you need to brand yourself. Right
Mhm.
now, it's all about branding. I mean, you talk about Ken Perry. Ken Perry, Ken Perry is compliance. And if you have questions about that or need help around that, Ken Perry is not just compliance, but entertaining compliance.
Mhm.
Nobody does it like Ken Perry. Nobody. Not the
Mhm.
imitators, not the others, not the wannabes, and you bring that. So I think it's a
Mhm.
matter of finding what your expertise is and not be afraid to share that.
When I want to dive into one more area, because I don't so let me preface this with, I don't like when people refer to me as an entrepreneur. I think entrepreneur is,
Hmm.
I have started one company in my entire life,
Uh,
and that company worked out, and I haven't had to go start any more companies. We've had to
That just
shift
means you're
in the
not a
company,
serial
but
entrepreneur.
yeah, I'm not, I mean, I did something once, right? And then I've just been part of a team ever since. When I think of entrepreneur, the things that you've done, like, you have not depended on a W-2 for much of your career.
mm-mm,
My daughter Avery is an entrepreneur, where
mm,
she just thinks in that way. She's like, I'll just figure it out. You have bounced. When something closes, your shift is like, that's cool. There's a need here. I'm going to go fill it because it meets what I love to do. Right. And it always comes around training and building community.
mm,
And so even with the AI thing, where you're like, AI happened. This community needs to know more about AI. I'm really good at building communities, and I'm also really good at training. My services will be great here. But you
mm.
didn't say, I wonder which company will hire me to do this type of thing. You've never said that.
No.
You've always gone, fill the need, and I'm going to do this without the expectation or the dependence on a paycheck from a larger organization. Is that just ingrained in you? It's part of that shift quickly. It's fill the need.
I don't
But
know. It's a darn good question, isn't it, Ken? Yeah, I think it's shifting. It's filling the need. I like creating new things. I like the change. I like creating new content. So when AI came along, it's funny because I said, "Oh my gosh, I was like built for this. Like this is like the perfect timing for me. It's new, it's fun, it's complex, so there's a lot of layers to it, and it's going to be here for a little bit." And so, yeah, it's like let's get into that.
It adds another element that I think is fascinating and fits perfectly into the little I know about you so far, but it does seem to me that this fits perfectly. It's also created an awful lot of people who want to stay in the foxhole.
100%.
It has this amazing ability to make people afraid of what's this going to mean?
Yeah.
I don't want to learn it. I don't understand it. I want to stay in my foxhole, and that's for the techies.
Yeah, and it'll go away.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it won't.
I'm so writing on the mirror when I get home. I was built for this. That's so powerful.
That is powerful.
Yeah.
Because that's how you take on everything.
Yeah.
Is I was built for this. You
Yeah.
wouldn't do it if you weren't, right?
Yeah.
But you're naturally drawn towards things that you were built for, and that's why you've been successful, right? That's a large part of it, is because you look at it and you go, "I was built for this. Like, watch me," and then you
Yeah.
just step into it.
Yeah. I really think the AI, though, it's like all the lessons I've learned have put me to this spot. I'm so excited about the AI. That's why we switched. We were doing our podcast, which I started in 2020. And it started out Mortgage Video Mastermind. And then I switched it to Mortgage Influencers when people started doing more about podcasts and different things. And then when the AI came along, it's like, we got to shift. Most people would keep going with the name. It's like, we'll change the name. So now we call it AI Clubhouse. And Frank Garay, who you were on his podcast and you've been on ours too, he was on the podcast with me when we did the Mortgage Influencers. And he's like, "I'm too busy to do this." And I had him on our podcast to talk about his MoveTube, which I love. It's brilliant. And he was on our podcast twice. He goes, "Can I just come back every week?" So he's a co-host, Steve Richmond.
That means
That's
you're
how
on a
it got
podcast.
here.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened to me. You want to be on my podcast? Sure. You want to help me with the podcast? Sure. You want to work here? Sure.
And that's it. So Frank's on there. And for us, it's like, again, shifting. It's like, hey, this is a topic and I don't know what it looks like, but you know what? Let's figure it out. I'm going to surround myself. Scott Shang has been on with me for a long time. Steve Richmond. Steve was our biggest promoter when we had our podcast. And I could always tell when he was out speaking because I'd get all these requests for people to join. We have a Facebook group. And I'm like, "Steve, you need to be on our podcast." He goes, "What do I have to say?" I'm like, you have a lot to say, my friend." And so he's been our co-host and I love
he's
him to
amazing.
death.
Yeah.
He is so great.
And he is such a promoter. Like, we can always
He
tell
is.
where he is in the country. Same thing where it's like, I'll call Steve and be like,
A
"Dude, were you just
heartfelt.
in Houston?" And he's like, "Yeah, you saw that?" And I'm like, because you just see it, because
Yeah.
he's such a promoter of what he believes in.
Yeah, he is fabulous. And when we switched to AI, he's like, "I know nothing about AI." And I said, "That's what makes it so great, because I know you'll have great questions." And so, yeah, so that's what we did. And then I wrote a course. It's an online course on ChatGPT because nobody was teaching anybody how to use it. Not even OpenAI is teaching anybody how to use it. And so I wrote a 10-hour course on it. And now it's like, I think we're gonna open it up. So if you guys are gonna do courses around AI and stuff like that, it's called AI Mastery Center. And my goal in doing that is to make it to where other people who may not have the resources or know how to develop content, that we can put their courses in there too, because AI is phenomenal. I mean, I love everything you guys are doing with it. And ahead of it, it's like being able to offer that solution. And that's it. It's like you have to think ahead. There was a quote I heard one time, and I think it was Andrew Carnegie that said it, that if there's a big pile of doo-doo, look for the pony. Something had to
Okay,
make
I love
it.
that.
Oh my gosh,
Right?
that's
And
awesome.
so for years, I had friends that would send me My Little Ponies because that was
it's better than
2008.
sending you the other thing.
Well, yeah. Maybe that explains something. No, I never got that in the mail. But, it's like if there is a big pile of doo-doo, look for the pony. Something had to make it. If you find the pony, then you can find something to be able to build
That
around
is uniquely profound You
I
know,
didn't say it. Like I
I'm
said,
giving
it
you
was,
credit
I think
for
it
it.
was
So
Andrew
cool.
Carnegie.
It's funny. We didn't make some sort of policy change here to stop talking about where the industry might be going. We
Yeah.
didn't do that consciously, but all of a sudden in recent months, we've just said, look, this is the market we have.
Yeah.
Adapt, change,
You have
adapt.
oranges.
And now we're starting to hear other people, not that we certainly didn't coin the phrase, but other people are saying the same thing. This is the market we have. Shift hard, shift fast. Don't wait for rates to change. Don't wait for anything else. Adapt. And if there's a big pile of poo in front of you, then somewhere there's a pony.
Yeah.
Figure it out. I
Yeah.
love that. I
Yeah.
love that.
I
Find the
love
pony.
that. Sell oranges and tell people you sell oranges. Like, I feel like people are like, well, I mean, I have these oranges. And it's like, no, that's all you have. So figure out how to make them
And
awesome.
they're great oranges.
And people
Yeah.
like oranges.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So go figure out where
Or
those
go make
people are
orange
that
juice
need
and
oranges.
figure
Yeah.
it out.
Well, and sometimes, you know, we have been in this industry, and I speak very loosely because I know all of us probably. I mean, I think you.
I'm 25.
Yeah, and I'm about the same. Sue Woodard and I said over 20. We can just say
I'm
20.
an age, but that's
I'm 26.
in the industry.
98. Yeah.
Yeah, longer. So
Wow.
you win.
No, I don't want to win that
It
game.
means you're buying drinks.
You win and you're younger than me.
Jeez.
But, you know, I think it's a matter of we get in our heads because it's so much of what we do every day, but others may not know that, right? Others know I want to buy a house or I'm being relocated. Look for the reasons why people are moving and get back to that. You know, our first house and actually our house, my husband built before I even met him. He had it on an arm. I think the low was maybe 13 and the high was 18. When we refinanced out of that one, I think we did into a loan that was 9%. And then when we bought our second house, because he still has the paperwork on it, he found the other day, and the interest rate was like I think it was 7 3/8. And we were so excited. It's like, oh my gosh, can you believe this? This is phenomenal. And so, you know, it's like back, I don't know when it was, when you could get a car loan and it was like 0%, no interest, no money down. And then that went away. And then cars weren't sold for a while. And eventually people forget about it. It's like, you know what? It is what it is.
Yep.
I go to Fred Meyer's, I buy produce. I don't know how much the lettuce is. I buy it. You know, and gas goes up, gas goes down. It's like, I still drive a car. You don't have to deal with that anymore,
We have
my
no
friend.
gas cars anymore. Yeah.
Till the grid goes down.
But I also did just pay $3.33 for gas yesterday in South Carolina.
Oh, in your rental?
And I was like, this is pretty cool.
Yeah, it was
in the rental.
It was $3.25 when I was in Texas a
That's
couple weeks
crazy.
in Dallas. Yeah.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Well, it's more expensive for us because we have refineries all up and down the West Coast.
Right,
so
that makes
For some
sense.
reason, it's more expensive
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah.
I
Anyway.
think we would be remiss before we wrap up here. I think it'd be remiss if we of course, we want to ask where can people get a hold of you. But before we do that, amongst the other adventures of your life, you've written a few books. You mentioned one earlier about the one you co-authored with Jack Canfield, the co-author of Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Yep.
Talk to me about the books you've written just a little bit in a brief description, if you wouldn't mind.
So the very first book I wrote was with Brian Tracy. And I did that because I wanted to get more of a national presence and, you know, known in the West Coast, mostly in California. People always think I live in California because I do a lot in California. And so I wanted to do that. So I co-authored my first book with Brian Tracy and then co-authored a second book with Brian Tracy. And then I started writing some of my own. So I'm trying to think. I think I wrote The Edgy Marketer and then I did my book with Jack Canfield. And then since then, I've probably authored about 15 books. Most of them are really how-to books. They're business books. I have a book on podcasting. I have a book on doing videos. I have a book. We've done several planning books, video planning books. I have one on VA. We have one on leadership. And so for me, writing is kind of like writing a course. So writing a book is like writing a course. And I have a system down, so it's kind of simple. And then now I've started helping other people to get their books published.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it's been a fun journey getting into that.
So how can people get a hold of you if they want to find out more about your podcast, your books, or just
So lots of different ways. If you're interested in AI, you can go to AI Mastery Center. If you want to join the clubhouse, it's AI Clubhouse. We're on Facebook. If you want to know how to podcast or do videos, my company is EduMarketing, edumarketing.com, or you can just go to Meet Ginger Bell and do that.
Well,
That's
as
awesome.
someone who just did, thank you. It's been a pleasure so far, and I'm just really thrilled to get to know you more. It's just been a fantastic time having you in here today.
One last question for you. We ask all of our guests at the very end of the
Ah.
podcast, if you, knowing what you know now, all the things you've done, all the things that you've been through, if you were to go back to 10-year-old Ginger Bell and give her one piece of advice, what might you say to 10-year-old Ginger Bell?
Believe in yourself
Mm.
and shift hard and shift fast.
Nice.
Of course.
I love it.
Great
All right,
ending.
Ginger, thank you so much for joining us today. It was
Thank you.
awesome.
Pleasure.
Loved it.